I could feel the weight of their stares before I even noticed them. My friends had gathered around Cassidy like a protective shield, but their eyes weren't on me. They were measuring me, judging me, waiting for me to prove myself. And the words came, sharp and deliberate. Cassidy is dating the waiter. There's a difference between being humble and being desperate, one of them declared, her tone dripping with amusement. I froze, balancing a tray of freshly plated appetizers, my hands trembling slightly. I had spent 8 years building something from nothing, turning a single small restaurant into a chain of 3 upscale locations. My life was full of long nights, burnt fingers, and the hum of kitchens at rush hour. I wasn't flashy about it, and I never needed to be. I drove a modest car, dressed simply, and most importantly, I worked alongside my staff constantly. I was the owner. They didn't know that yet, but they would. Cassidy walked in with her friends, all laughter and light chatter, unaware that the storm they were about to unleash was about to hit. Delaney, my boyfriend, was helping manage a table, calm and composed as ever, while the others sized me up. Cassidy, the self-proclaimed hotshot among them, flagged me down, her expression a perfect mixture of superiority and performance. "Excuse me, waiter," she said, the kind of voice reserved for people they considered beneath them. I didn't let my gaze falter. "I'll get your server," I said evenly. I was just helping out. And then came the final blow, delivered with cruel precision, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Cassidy's laughter rang out, sharp and unyielding. "Can you believe Cassidy is dating the waiter? I mean, she's sweet and all, but there's a difference between being humble and being desperate." Delaney glanced at me, concern flickering across his face. My reaction? Not a word in my defense. Just steady, measured breathing, trying to keep my composure. Red-faced, I realized then that they didn't see me for who I truly was. They saw only what they assumed. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands. Tonight, everything I had built, every late night, every rush, every lesson learned, would be tested. And I would face it, not with anger, but with the clarity that comes when you finally see someone's true colors. I met Delaney 7 months ago at a charity gala downtown. He wasn't flashy, but there was something in the way he carried himself that immediately caught my attention. Confident, calm, quietly observant. He noticed details most people would overlook. I was captivated, not by his looks, though he was undeniably handsome, but by the way he treated the people around him, from the servers to the volunteers. That kind of attention to others, it was rare, and I had been starved for it for a long time. I remember the first time he came to my restaurant. I was managing a busy Friday dinner, sleeves rolled up, nerves fraying as tickets piled up on the kitchen pass. And there he was, walking in like he belonged, smiling politely at the staff, placing his coat on the rack, and looking directly at me. There was an ease in him, a warmth that made me want to step out from behind the chaos and simply be present. We talked that night for hours, over a quiet corner table after the dinner rush. He asked questions about my work, not just surface-level curiosity, but genuinely wanting to understand how I had built the restaurants, how I had survived the long nights, the mistakes, the triumphs. I'd been cautious about dating someone new. In my 30s, after dedicating almost a decade of my life to building something meaningful, I wasn't interested in anyone impressed by titles or status. I wanted someone who could respect the grind, who could see the process as much as the result. Delaney fit that bill perfectly. He didn't treat me differently because I was the owner. He treated me as a person, equal and real. Our relationship blossomed slowly. Weekends became sacred. Sometimes we'd cook together at one of the restaurants, him chopping vegetables beside me, us laughing at minor mistakes in the kitchen. Other times, we'd wander through art galleries, sip coffee in the small cafes I frequented for inspiration, or simply talk for hours in the quiet of my apartment. There was comfort in knowing that he didn't need to impress me, and I didn't need to pretend. With him, the walls I'd built around my life started to soften. I thought I had built a life that balanced passion and love, work and romance. Delaney seemed genuinely interested in every facet of it. But I'll admit, sometimes I worried he didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what I'd accomplished. People assume when you work in restaurants that you're just a server, just a chef, not the owner who poured her soul into the business. I tried to overlook it, believing he would see eventually. And in truth, I wasn't completely transparent with him either. not out of deception, but because my world was so vast and complex, and I feared the moment he would judge it as too much or too ordinary. I didn't want him to see me as someone merely working in a kitchen. I wanted him to see me as someone who had fought, scraped, and built every step of the way. Those 7 months felt effortless, but I now realize that even the smoothest relationships have undercurrents. The laughter, the shared meals, the quiet support, they were real, yes, but so was the shadow of societal assumptions. And that night at the restaurant, the one I had thought would be a perfect dinner, I would discover just how fragile perceptions can be, how quickly admiration can turn to embarrassment in the eyes of others. And yet, even in the back of my mind, I clung to one comforting thought. Delaney knew me. He had seen the rawness, the sweat, the dedication, and the pride. That knowledge, that understanding, was supposed to be enough, or so I thought. The first sign that something was off didn't come with an argument or a confrontation. It came in the subtle shift in Delaney's demeanor that evening. We were walking to my flagship restaurant for what I thought would be a quiet dinner, a rare break from the chaos of the week. I had made the reservation weeks ago, planning every detail, wanting it to be special. But the moment we stepped inside, I felt it, a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Delaney was polite, attentive, smiling at the staff as I introduced him, but there was a tightness around his eyes, a hesitation in the way he moved through the room. At first I brushed it off, assuming he was just tired from work. But then I noticed the way he lingered near the tables where other guests were seated, glancing over with something between curiosity and discomfort. It became more apparent as we were seated. Delaney kept checking his phone subtly, occasionally tensing as if bracing for a message. I asked him what was wrong, and he smiled, dismissing it as nothing. But the unease didn't leave me. I had learned to trust my instincts after years in restaurants, reading the room, anticipating trouble before it erupted. My gut told me this was more than a casual distraction. Then came Cassidy and her friends. They arrived in a whirlwind of laughter and perfume, immediately drawing attention. Delaney's body language stiffened. He introduced me, yes, but there was a careful detachment, as if he were bracing for impact. I had assumed Delaney would be a shield, someone who would naturally stand by me in these social situations, someone who would deflect and support. But his hesitance was subtle yet telling. As the evening progressed, I watched the small signals that something wasn't right. Delaney's eyes flicked toward me often, but his expressions were cautious, measured. He laughed at the friends' jokes, nodded politely, but there was no real alignment between us. I could see him calculating, weighing reactions, almost as if he feared what might happen if he didn't act a certain way. And then came Cassidy's first comment, the verbal spark that ignited the storm. "Excuse me, waiter," she said, and though I kept my composure, my stomach dropped. I glanced at Delaney, silently expecting him to intervene, to shut it down. But he didn't. He looked uncomfortable, yes, but he didn't step forward. He didn't defend me. It was the first crack I noticed in our relationship, the subtle inability to fully support me when it mattered, and it planted a seed of doubt. Was Delaney truly proud of me? Did he truly understand the life I had built? Or had he been charmed by the idea of me, the image I projected, rather than the reality of my sweat, my late nights, my endless responsibilities? By the time they made the humiliating comment loud enough for surrounding diners to hear, I realized the truth. It wasn't just about what they said. It was about Delaney's reaction, or lack thereof. The person I trusted most, the one I believed would stand beside me, was failing to do so. That night, a quiet tension settled between us, unspoken but palpable. I smiled politely, managed the restaurant, and kept everything under control, but inside, the doubts were starting to grow. The conflict had been seeded, not through shouting, not through betrayal yet, but through hesitation, embarrassment, and the first moment of witnessing someone I loved falter in defending me. I didn't know it then, but this seed would grow into a storm, testing not only my pride and patience, but also the foundation of trust and understanding I had built with Delaney over those 7 months. The moment came faster than I could have anticipated. I was behind the pass, sweat clinging to my shirt as I expedited orders and ran plates to the tables when Delaney and his friends were seated. I had planned to greet them properly after the dinner rush, but before I could, Cassidy waved me over with that unmistakable tone of someone performing superiority, the kind that makes your stomach churn. "Excuse me, waiter," she said, and my chest tightened. I glanced at Delaney, hoping he would intervene, maybe correct the situation. He didn't. He stayed seated, nervously sipping water, his eyes flicking between me and the table as if bracing for impact. I forced a polite smile. "I'll get your server," I said evenly. "I was just helping out." Her friends nodded, and I could feel their judgment like a physical weight pressing down. Then came Cassidy's devastating line, deliberate and loud. "Can you believe Cassidy is dating the waiter? I mean, she's sweet and all, but there's a difference between being humble and being desperate." The laughter that followed was piercing. It wasn't just amusement, it was mockery, aimed at me, at everything I had built, at the work that had consumed my life for nearly a decade. I froze for a split second, and then anger and disbelief surged through me. I glanced at Delaney. His face was a mixture of discomfort and indecision. He didn't stand up for me. He didn't defend me. Instead, he shifted in his seat, avoiding eye contact with both me and the group. And in that instant, the world tilted. Delaney had known what I did for a living. He had seen me work long nights, handle impossible situations, sweat and bleed for my restaurants. He had seen my pride, my hands worn and strong from years in the kitchen, my mind sharp from managing schedules, vendors, and staff. And yet, here he was, failing to stand by me when I needed him most. "Cassidy, that's enough," I said firmly, my voice steady, despite the pounding of my heart. I forced myself to breathe, to maintain composure for my staff and the diners who were now watching the unfolding scene. "I'm the owner here, and my staff doesn't deserve to be disrespected." Cassidy's expression faltered, and the others looked confused, but Delaney's face didn't change. He didn't offer any support, any acknowledgement, any recognition of the humiliation I was enduring. Then came the worst part. Delaney spoke, his voice low, almost apologetic. I think maybe we want different things from life," he said, glancing down at his hands. "And I can't keep pretending otherwise. I'm sorry, but I think we're done." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. In front of the restaurant, in front of my staff, in front of other diners, in front of the people who had judged me without knowing me, Delaney, my partner, the person I trusted most, had broken up with me because he was embarrassed. I felt my knees weaken, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. The tray I had been holding threatened to slip, and I forced myself to straighten, to breathe, to not collapse in front of everyone. My mind raced, trying to process the betrayal, the humiliation, the shock. Blake, my manager, appeared beside me, his eyes sharp, protective. "Do you want me to handle this?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Delaney and his friends. I shook my head. "No, I need to see this through," I said, my voice trembling slightly, but my spine stiffened with resolve. I had built everything on my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone, including the person I loved, undermine it without standing my ground. Delaney's friends shuffled uncomfortably, the laughter fading as the gravity of the situation settled in, and I realized something important. This wasn't just about the breakup. It was about recognition, respect, and truth. I deserved to be seen for what I had built, for who I was, not judged by assumptions or social pretenses. That night, as I helped guide Delaney and his friends out, the restaurant buzzing around us, I felt the first stirrings of clarity. My heartbreak was real, but so was the lesson. True respect, from a partner or anyone else, isn't optional. It isn't a courtesy. It's a fundamental recognition of worth. And in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty. I would never settle for less. Not for anyone. After Delaney walked out, the restaurant felt unnaturally quiet, though the service continued around me. My hands were shaking slightly, and I gripped the edge of the counter as if it could anchor me to reality. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every beat echoing the disbelief and betrayal simmering inside me. Blake hovered nearby, protective, his eyes asking without words if I was okay. I nodded, though it was a lie. I wasn't okay, not even close. I had been blindsided by the person I trusted most, someone who had promised me partnership, support, love, and yet in a public moment of humiliation, he had faltered. Worse, he had chosen to abandon me entirely. I took a deep breath and stepped away from the pass, moving through the dining room as the staff continued their work. Their faces were a mixture of concern and quiet pride. They knew who I was, what I had built, and they knew I didn't deserve this. Emma, my head server, shot me a supportive glance. Everything okay, boss? She asked gently. I forced a smile, not trusting myself to speak yet. Better than okay, I said, though my voice was strained. Inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions: shock, grief, anger, disbelief, humiliation. I replayed every moment in my head: the laughter, Cassidy's cruel words, Delaney's hesitation, and finally, the words that cut deeper than any insult could have. I think we want different things from life. I'm sorry, but I think we're done. I found a quiet corner in the office, closing the door behind me, and let the tears I had been holding back spill freely. My breath was uneven, chest tight, mind racing. How could someone who knew me, who had seen my struggle, my work, my dedication, choose shame over love, choose embarrassment over loyalty? I thought about every time I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with Delaney, every shared dinner, every quiet conversation, every moment where I had trusted him completely. And I realized that trust had been misplaced, not because he didn't care for me, but because he had revealed, in the worst possible way, the depth of his own priorities. The humiliation wasn't just personal, it was professional. I had built my life, my career, my pride from the ground up, and yet in a single moment, someone I loved had treated it as insignificant, as laughable. I thought of the staff watching, of the diners witnessing, of the countless hours I had spent perfecting every detail of my restaurants, and I felt a mix of fury and clarity. I replayed Delaney's face over and over, the discomfort, the avoidance, the apology, wrapped in a cowardly retreat. It wasn't love, it wasn't partnership, it was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of status, fear of being associated with something real and gritty and tangible. And then, slowly, the anger began to sharpen into resolve. My hands stopped trembling. My breath steadied. The betrayal was raw, but it was also illuminating. I saw clearly who I had been with, who I had trusted, and who I would allow into my life moving forward. Blake knocked lightly and stepped inside. "You okay?" he asked again. I looked at him. This man who had seen me through kitchen fires, investor meetings, and every chaotic moment in between, and I felt a surge of gratitude. "I'm fine," I said finally, my voice firmer this time. "Better than fine. I just needed a moment to realize something important." I walked back into the dining room, head held high, and felt the subtle but unmistakable support of my staff behind me. They didn't need to say it. They were angry on my behalf, proud of how I handled myself, and steadfast in the knowledge that I was worthy of respect. Delaney was gone, but the lesson lingered. Respect, loyalty, and understanding weren't optional in any relationship, personal or professional, and anyone who failed to uphold that, who allowed embarrassment or fear to dictate their actions, had no place beside me in my life. That night, as I moved through the restaurant, completing service, greeting diners, and ensuring every detail was perfect, I felt a strange clarity. I was heartbroken, yes, betrayed, undeniably. But I was also stronger, wiser, and more certain than ever that I would not compromise my worth for anyone, no matter how much I cared for them. The next days were a whirlwind. Word of what happened at the restaurant had spread faster than I could have imagined. Some diners came specifically to witness the owner who had been publicly mocked and yet had maintained composure. They came to see how I ran my business, how I treated my staff, and how I handled a situation that could have easily unraveled everything. But it wasn't just my customers who were paying attention. Delaney's family began to weigh in, subtly at first. Texts from his mother, delicate and polite in tone, asking if everything was all right between us. Calls from his sister, half curious, half judgmental, wondering if I was upset or if I had somehow provoked the conflict. Their concern wasn't for me, it was for how the situation reflected on them. And it became clear that Delaney too was caught between loyalty to me and fear of his family's perception. When Delaney finally reached out directly, it was under the guise of attempting reconciliation. "I messed up," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I let their words get to me, and I didn't defend you. I should have, and I regret it." I stared at my phone, the weight of the betrayal still heavy, my fingers gripping it as if it could shatter with one wrong move. "You didn't just mess up," I typed back slowly, carefully choosing each word. You chose to abandon me in front of everyone, in front of my staff, my customers, and in front of the people who had no right to judge my life. That's not regret. That's shame, and that's on you, not them. Delaney's responses came in fragments, hesitant apologies mingled with explanations that tried to justify his inaction. I didn't know how to react. I froze. I was embarrassed. Embarrassed. That word hit me harder than any insult could. Embarrassed by the person I loved, by the life I had built, by my sweat and my nights spent working while he sat comfortably observing. My hands shook, not from sadness alone, but from a rising anger I hadn't fully felt yet. And yet, despite the hurt, I couldn't deny the lingering care I still felt for him. It was twisted and complicated. This person who had failed me so publicly still mattered in my heart. But I had to reconcile that care with the reality of what had happened. Love alone wasn't enough to excuse humiliation or betrayal. The tension escalated further when Delaney showed up at my restaurant unannounced the following evening. He approached cautiously, eyes cast downward, as though fearing my reaction. I wanted to explain in person, he said softly. I met him halfway, maintaining a measured calm. There's nothing left to explain, I replied, though the words felt like a fragile dam holding back the flood of emotions inside me. What happened was clear. Your priorities, your choices, they've been revealed, and I don't need an explanation to know who you are and what you value. His silence spoke volumes. He looked pained, regretful, yet powerless to change the narrative. Around us, staff continued their work, exchanging glances but maintaining professionalism. I could see their quiet support, the unspoken message that they had my back. That loyalty, earned over years, contrasted sharply with Delaney's momentary falter. It was then that his family reached out again. This time, his mother called, voice gentle but insistent. I think you might be overreacting, she said, as if my indignation was the problem. Delaney didn't mean to hurt you. Perhaps you could see things from his perspective. I felt a fire ignite within me. Perspective? I asked, voice sharp. My perspective is simple. I built everything I have with my own hands. I led my team through chaos, and I faced judgment from strangers while the person I trusted most did nothing. There's no perspective in humiliation. There's only respect, or the absence of it. Delaney's family wavered, unsure of how to respond, and in that moment, the escalation reached its peak, not through shouting, not through public confrontation, but through the quiet, undeniable truth. I was standing firm in my worth, and no amount of social expectation, familial pressure, or private regret could diminish it. Yet internally, the battle continued. Anger and sorrow collided with lingering affection, creating a storm that left me restless at night. I would replay the events, the subtle cues, the embarrassment, and the choices he made. I wrestled with the desire to forgive and the knowledge that true respect had been absent when I needed it most. Delaney tried small gestures, flowers left at the restaurant, brief texts checking in, but each act only reminded me of the fracture that had occurred. I realized then that escalation isn't always about raising voices. Sometimes it's the quiet persistence of reality pressing on your conscience, demanding acknowledgement. Through it all, my staff became my anchor. They rallied around me, quietly but fiercely protective, ensuring that the restaurant continued to function flawlessly, that our service remained impeccable, and that I never felt alone. Their loyalty reminded me that respect and support aren't just words, they are actions, consistently demonstrated over time. And as the week wore on, I understood something crucial. The escalation had clarified everything. It had revealed who stood by me, who faltered, and who mattered. Delaney's choices had exposed his true priorities, and my response, rooted in self-respect and clarity, defined mine. It hit me on the third night after the incident. I was alone in the restaurant, lights dimmed, the clatter of dishes and the hum of the refrigerator, the only companions to my thoughts. For the first time, the full weight of betrayal, humiliation, and loss crashed down on me. I sank into the corner of the office chair, head in my hands, trying to make sense of what had happened. The heartbreak wasn't just about Delaney leaving me. It was about the person I thought I knew, the trust I had placed in him, and the public unraveling of my dignity. I could still hear Cassidy's laugh, the way Delaney had hesitated, the slow, mortifying acceptance of defeat in front of everyone. Each memory was a jagged shard slicing through me, Tears came freely now, no longer restrained by the need to appear composed. I was furious, yes, but more than that, I felt abandoned. I had invested myself completely, my heart, my trust, my time, and it had all been discarded in a moment of cowardice. The unfairness of it clawed at me, raw and relentless. I thought about every late night, every early morning, every moment I had spent building my restaurants, pouring my soul into something I believed in, only to have it diminished by someone I loved. The thought that Delaney had prioritized social perception over me, over my life, over our bond, made me feel small in a way I hadn't felt in years. I remembered the quiet pride of my staff, their loyalty, their unwavering support, and yet it didn't soothe the ache of personal betrayal. Even surrounded by people who respected me, even with the knowledge that I had built something significant, I felt exposed, raw, and vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had never questioned my worth professionally, yet personally, I had been blindsided. The darkness wasn't just sadness. It was a profound sense of dislocation. I questioned myself, my judgment, my choices. Had I misread him all along? Had I been naive to think that love alone could bridge the gaps in values and respect? Every answer felt like another layer of grief. I scrolled through my phone, hesitant to look at his messages, each one a reminder of what I had lost and what I had endured. Apologies, tentative attempts to reconnect, gestures meant to soothe, but none of them reached the core of what I needed: acknowledgement, defense, unwavering support. I realized that none of that could undo what had been done, nor could it erase the humiliation I had felt. I felt a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. It was Blake. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. "We're all here, and we've got your back, whatever you need." I looked up, seeing the concern in his eyes, the silent offer of solidarity. For a moment, I envied the simplicity of professional loyalty, the certainty of it. But even that comfort was bittersweet. It reminded me that Delaney's absence wasn't just a physical void, but a profound emotional one. I retreated further into myself, closing the office door, shutting out the world. The silence pressed in on me, my mind replaying every insult, every hesitation, every choice he had made. It felt endless. It felt like the walls of the restaurant, my safe haven, were closing in, trapping me in the echo of betrayal. Sleep didn't come. My thoughts twisted and turned, chasing what-ifs and might-have-beens. I imagined confronting him again, demanding the support I deserved, imagining the words that would never be spoken. I felt rage, sorrow, and emptiness in equal measure. And in the darkest hours of that night, I confronted a painful truth. Love was not enough. Trust, respect, and alignment of values mattered more. Delaney had failed to provide the foundation I needed, and in that failure, he had shown me the stark reality of our relationship. I curled into myself on the office couch, the hum of the empty restaurant, a lullaby of isolation. Tears fell silently, the weight of heartbreak pressing down. I was alone, yet painfully aware of the support surrounding me, the staff, the business I had built, the integrity I carried. Yet it felt insufficient. The betrayal had carved a hollow in me that would take time to fill. And in that hollow, one thought persisted, quiet but relentless. I could survive this. I had survived every challenge before, and I would survive this too. But the survival came with a bitter taste. It was not a triumph yet, not a relief. It was the acknowledgement of pain, of fracture, of loss, and the understanding that the road to reclaiming myself would be long and painful. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in the quiet aftermath of the chaos. I was reviewing inventory in the back office, trying to lose myself in work to quiet the relentless swirl of emotions, when Blake knocked and stepped in, a serious look on his face. "I think it's time you know something," he said. I looked up, wary but curious. "What is it?" "There's more to what happened with Delaney than you realize. Cassidy and her friends weren't just being cruel. They were trying to manipulate him. They knew exactly what buttons to push, and Delaney, he's been struggling with expectations from his family and friends more than he ever admitted to you." I felt a flicker of anger at the thought of him being used, but it was tempered by clarity. That didn't excuse what had happened. I had to see the whole picture, but my respect, my self-worth, and my boundaries were not negotiable. That night, I confronted Delaney, this time not with pleading or heartbreak, but with controlled, unwavering strength. He came to the restaurant again, uncertain, his eyes scanning the room as if seeking reassurance or escape. I met him at the entrance, steady, composed, every inch of me radiating resolve. "Delaney," I began, voice firm, "I've learned something important. Not about you, not about what you did, because that's already painfully clear, but about myself. I know my worth, I know what I deserve, and I will not compromise that for anyone, even for you." He hesitated, searching my face, perhaps hoping to find a trace of the same uncertainty I had felt before. I didn't know how to handle it. I froze. "I wish I could take it back," he admitted, voice low. I held his gaze. "You can't take it back. You made your choice, and now it's time I make mine." The air between us was heavy, tense, but charged with the unspoken power shift. For the first time since the humiliation, I wasn't pleading. I wasn't hurt beyond reason. I was asserting myself. I laid out the truth calmly, fact by fact, how his hesitation, his fear, and the weight of external opinions had hurt me. How Cassidy and her friend's cruelty had exposed both his vulnerabilities and his failures. I made it unmistakably clear. I would not be defined by anyone else's perception of me, not even by the man I loved. Delaney's face shifted, a mixture of remorse, fear, and dawning comprehension. He realized that his inaction had cost him more than just a moment of pride. It had cost him the trust of someone he truly cared about. But even in that realization, I felt no pity. The power balance had shifted. I was no longer the one broken or begging. I was standing firmly in my truth. Blake watched silently from the side, a quiet witness to my reclamation of self. The staff, though busy with closing duties, were aware, their loyalty palpable in the unspoken support radiating from the room. They had witnessed my journey from shock to clarity, and now they were observing my assertion of authority over my personal life, as I had long maintained over my business. By the end of the conversation, Delaney understood clearly. The relationship was over, not because of a single moment, but because it had exposed incompatible values, fear, and an inability to defend what mattered most. I was no longer the one left vulnerable. I had reclaimed my dignity, my power, and my perspective. Walking him to the door, I paused. This isn't about anger anymore. It's about clarity. I know who I am, what I've built, and what I deserve, and I hope you find the same clarity in yourself. He nodded, silent, understanding, but powerless to change the outcome. For the first time, I truly felt the weight lift, the burden of humiliation, the grief, and the uncertainty. I had turned the moment of darkness into a declaration of self-respect. As the door closed behind him, I returned to the center of the restaurant, looking at my team, their eyes filled with admiration and quiet pride. I realized in that moment that reclaiming my power wasn't just about the relationship. It was about every choice I had made, every boundary I had set, and every ounce of effort I had invested in my life. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. I was whole, independent, and unyielding. And in that clarity, the path forward became unmistakably clear. I would no longer allow fear, embarrassment, or external pressure to dictate who I was or whom I allowed into my life. The days after I confronted Delaney were surreal. The immediate tension had lifted, but the ripple effects were just beginning. Word of our confrontation had somehow reached not only his social circle, but his family, and suddenly everyone wanted an explanation, an apology, or a narrative that would soothe their bruised egos. Delaney tried calling multiple times, leaving hesitant messages that were at once pleading and defensive. "I just want to explain myself," one read. Another, "Please, can we talk? I was wrong, but I love you." I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, but because my boundaries were no longer negotiable. Every attempt he made only reminded me of the choice he had already made, the choice to let me stand humiliated in front of everyone. The lesson had been learned, and it wasn't my job to offer him another chance to rewrite history. His family began to weigh in more actively. His mother called, feigning concern, but each conversation betrayed a subtle blame. "I think perhaps you're being too harsh." Delaney didn't understand the situation. I felt a surge of incredulity. Too harsh. I had been publicly embarrassed, and suddenly I was the one under scrutiny. I allowed myself a moment of silence, imagining every instance of disrespect, every dismissive glance, every laugh at my expense. Harsh? I repeated aloud to myself, voice low and bitter. No, not harsh, just truth. Social circles. Delaney moved in, began gossiping. They speculated, they judged, they whispered behind backs about my supposed overreaction. Yet I noticed a strange pattern. Those who truly knew me, who had seen my work ethic, my integrity, and my leadership, stood firmly on my side. The fallout revealed character, not just his, but theirs as well. At the restaurant, the staff were more than supportive, they were protective. Emma, my head server, came up to me after a particularly busy service. They're talking, but we've got your back. Don't let their noise shake you. Blake, as always, observed quietly, a steady pillar beside me. You handled it with more class than most could manage, he said. You showed what real leadership looks like in business and in life. Meanwhile, Delaney's attempts at reconciliation became increasingly desperate. He showed up at the restaurant a week later, flowers in hand, hoping to stage a private apology in front of my staff. I intercepted him at the door, the recognition of futility in his eyes mirrored by the quiet firmness in mine. Delaney, I said, voice unwavering, the only apology I need is one you've already given yourself in reflection. The rest is not for me. You made your choice, and now you must live with it. I will not allow your indecision to disrupt my life further. His face fell, a mix of shame, frustration, and resignation. I didn't offer consolation. There was nothing to console. He had already lost the trust and respect he might have counted on. As the week unfolded, the real fallout hit him socially. Friends who had admired him for a polite, pleasant demeanor began to question his character, recognizing the cowardice it took to abandon someone he claimed to love in a moment that truly mattered. His credibility, once untouchable in his circle, took a subtle but undeniable hit. Even more revealing were his professional encounters. People he had relied on for support and validation, those who had initially sympathized with his embarrassment, now saw him as someone who avoided accountability, who let fear and social pressure dictate personal responsibility. Doors that had once opened for him began to close. Meanwhile, my life moved forward. I returned to the rhythm of my restaurants, immersed in the work I loved, surrounded by people who valued me. Each shift, each table, each satisfied customer reinforced my self-worth and reminded me why I had built this life on my own terms. The fallout didn't just strip Delaney of illusions. It clarified my own path. And yet, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I acknowledged the pain, the sting of betrayal, and the loss of someone I once loved. I honored the grief without letting it consume me. It was a necessary step to reclaim my emotional sovereignty. By the end of the month, the picture was clear. Delaney had lost not only my trust, but the subtle aura of untouchable charm he once carried. His social circle recognized the consequences of his choices, and I, having navigated the storm with integrity and strength, emerged more confident, more self-aware, and more grounded than ever before. The fallout was complete. It had settled where it belonged, not on me, not on those who had remained loyal, but squarely on the one who had misjudged, misstepped, and underestimated the value of respect, dignity, and unwavering self-worth. I realized then that fallout isn't merely about external consequences, it's the internal reckoning, the way reality asserts itself to balance the scales. And in that balance, I found not revenge, not triumph over him, but peace, a clarity of mind and spirit that would guide every decision I made moving forward. The night I finally closed the restaurant alone, I stood in the quiet dining room, the chairs stacked, the floor polished, and let the stillness wash over me. For the first time since it all began, I felt unburdened. The heartbreak, the humiliation, the anger, they were still there, but they no longer controlled me. I had reclaimed my story. I reflected on what I had learned. Love, I realized, isn't enough. Respect, trust, and alignment of values are the true pillars of a lasting partnership. No amount of charm, apology, or outward affection could substitute for genuine recognition of who you are and what you've built. I thought about Delaney, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He had shown me the truth about himself, and in doing so, he had gifted me one of the most important lessons of my life. Never compromise your self-worth for someone else's comfort or fear. The loyalty of my staff, the pride in the restaurants I had built from nothing, the integrity I maintained in every decision, these were the constants. They reminded me that my value is inherent and that the right people will respect, support, and celebrate it rather than diminish it. I allowed myself a quiet smile. I was ready to move forward, stronger and wiser. My heart, though bruised, was resilient. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and doubt, and I had emerged with dignity intact. I knew now that true connection isn't about appearances, social status, or approval. It's about mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering authenticity. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting on the pavement, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need validation from those who couldn't see my worth. I didn't need a partner to define my happiness. I had myself, my accomplishments, and the unwavering knowledge that I would never settle for anything less than respect and integrity. And that, I realized, was the most liberating lesson of all. The people worth keeping in your life are those who honor your journey, who celebrate your effort, and who see your heart and hands as valuable, not because of what you do for them, but because of who you are. I walked home with my head held high, a quiet smile playing on my lips. The heartbreak had passed, but the wisdom would stay forever. And for the first time in weeks, I felt whole.